Good afternoon. Welcome to the Gatewood Wealth Solutions weekly market commentary broadcast. This is John Gatewood, and with me today is our Chief Investment Officer, Aaron Tuttle. Welcome, Aaron.
Hey, thanks, John.
This broadcast is being recorded for future use.
All right. Well, we have that going for us.
Well, the presidential election is only 96 days away. Can you believe it?
No, I cannot.
And parents are grappling with what to do as more schools opt for virtual classroom or learn from home this fall. Some areas like St. Louis are reversing the reopenings by reviving restrictions. Protests have turned violent in Portland. Even Attorney General William Barr said yesterday that these peaceful protests are being hijacked by a very hardcore of instigators. In fact, police casualties far exceed anything on the civilian side. The presence of the federal law enforcement officers has certainly reinvigorated tensions. The Senate and the House are debating how to shape the next phase of coronavirus relief, including whether to extend or reduce the $600 weekly federal unemployment benefit. And despite all of this news, the market continues to hold its recovery this week. Aaron, can you shed light on what's happening in the economy and the market?
I will give it a shot, John. So there are no changes to our timeline. We have reviewed this each week. The current graph does suggest we have peaked on new cases and are on the decline. So that is good news, John. The daily deaths continue to show a slight rise. We expected to begin a decline in the next couple of weeks. As of now, we are above 1,000 on a 7-day average. However, yesterday numbers had deaths from unspecified days added to the daily count. Well, some of the deaths in Texas were added to that, but they didn't happen yesterday. They did happen before. We are seeing changes in hotspots, as mentioned last week. Mississippi and Tennessee are the states increasing most per capita at the moment, and we talked about the other southern states last week. Florida, Texas, and California have moved to the mostly same category. GDP numbers, so now we're moving into to the economy. They were basically flat for the week. S&P reported a 4.5% annual home price gain in May. I know my slides are delayed, so I will try to make sure that they line up with what I'm talking about. Sorry, guys in the crowd. This is down from 4.6 last month. However, it is above the 10-year average return, which, considering the current environment, housing's doing really well. As of Monday, 26% of the S&P 500 companies had reported earnings. They are tracking to a 43% year-over-year decline from the second quarter. That's the worst since the fourth quarter of 2009. Not all glum, though. The earnings beat rate is 79%, meaning that 79% of the companies that have reported have actually beat the assumed or the expected earnings, with 11 to 12% being surprises, so they were substantially above. These are all well above historical averages. And there was a slight increase in the forward estimates in July, which is encouraging. Now, 190 of the 500 companies will report this week. So you know that, especially Chris, we're paying a lot of attention to the earnings as they come out. And it's good to see that they are above estimate. Senate Republicans released the stimulus proposal, as you had mentioned. Unemployment, Republicans do not want to extend the extra $600 per week. They assume that is causing people to be less likely to go to work, and whenever you look at economic incentives, that would be true. Instead, they are wanting to issue checks for $1,200 for Americans making less than $75,000, with an additional $500 for dependents, adult or otherwise. Liability protection against COVID-19 lawsuits. This is a red line issue, and really it's probably the one that could have the biggest impact on the economy. If businesses and universities are not concerned about having a lawsuit because of a virus, they're more likely to be open, more likely to be more relaxed with the recent shutdowns. The Senate Republicans' proposal is $1 trillion, big number, and the democratically controlled House has a $3 trillion bill. No doubt that red line language that Senator McConnell has talked about requiring is likely to give concessions towards that $3 trillion bill. And I'm not picking on the Democrats, it's just we know we're not going to go under the $1 trillion. So it's going to be somewhere between.
Never going to be less, always going to be more.
That they are really good at spending our money. There is also language of restoring critical supply chains and Intellectual Property Act. Now, this is targeting that onshoring that we've been talking about in many of our other calls, where manufacturing will be brought back to the U.S. This specifically, though, is talking about medical industry and protective equipment. As a quick recap, I'll let my slide catch up here. In the previous week, we discussed the source of values using units of water in the desert. The key takeaway is each additional unit is valued on the next ranked desire. The more of a unit you have, the lower the ranked desire, the lower the price paid. So value is based on use value at the margin. Now that's a lot of things that I just said. But what it's saying is the last unit sets the price for the entire economic good. In this example, if there's only 1 unit of water, it would fetch a very high price. But if there are 7 units, then water is going to be at a very low price trading on the market. So it's all set on that last marginal unit. This is also the source of our supply and demand. Remember, higher supply means lower price, higher demand means a higher price. We then discussed what makes something money. And there is no specific thing that is money. Instead, there are things that best capture these 4 criteria that really make up money. And good money is something that's durable, portable, divisible, and intrinsically valuable, or has use value. Now, and the origin money comes from the barter economy, as individuals notice that some commodities are more likely to embody these 4 characteristics than other commodities. Now, I promise you, all the people in barter economies didn't have a checklist wondering and amounting it. Really, what they're looking for is something that's more saleable, or what we use the word now, more liquid. The price from purchase to when you sell it or trade it doesn't change much. So let's run that scenario. More people are likely to accept fish than a telescope because more people have a use for fish than a telescope. More people are likely to store grain than fish because it is more durable and divisible than fish. So making all of these better commodities as a medium of exchange or a store of value, or what we would use as money. Now, eventually, gold and silver are traded in the economy. Now, gold is easier to carry. Now, imagine trying to carry large bushels of wheat versus this small bag of coins. Gold has significant value relative to its size, since it is so rare, and this makes it easier to hide. So think about if you were trying to do a long caravan trade, and what you're not trying to do is sell wheat, you're just trying to buy something. Well, if you're carrying a lot of wheat, that makes it look like, or makes you more of a target. So having that concealed, small, high-value item would be very, very beneficial for people in trade. Also, gold and silver are both elements, so they can't decay. So gold, in essence, is more durable, more portable, more divisible than wheat, or really any other commodity. Now, there were also innovations for the metal as a medium of exchange. So it's not just looking for the commodities, there's things that we can do to make them better. So coins were minted, or really branded, which standardized purity and weight. There were also, if you look at the quarter, there's ridges that were added, and that's just kind of a holdover from old traditions, where it prevented people from clipping the coins as easily, really reducing the actual weight. The Spanish also created the pieces of 8, or where we come up with the word pesos. And it could be divided in 8 pie pieces. And each little piece was called a bit. So that's where we got the old saying, shaving a haircut, 2 bits. They were silver coins, so it wasn't 2/8 or 1/4 of an ounce of gold. That would be an expensive haircut. I learned
something new today.
Well, maybe your haircuts are 1/4 of an ounce of gold. Over time, a tipping point happened where the highest use value of gold was really its money use, not its jewelry use. And this is how we get to the point of why money has value. It has value because it had value yesterday. And that seems like it's circular logic. But if you take it all the way back, it would ultimately have value based on its use value through barter. This is why regression theorem says only a commodity can be money. However, we know digital dollars are used as money every single day, and they are not commodities. So let's review how paper money and then the banking account became money. Now, people continue to innovate on the 4 characteristics of money. It wasn't just they stopped at gold coins, and they moved from gold coins towards paper money and eventually central banking. Now, the use of paper money as a currency actually started first in China in the 8th century and then in Venice in the 14th century. There were problems with that. We're going to spend time visiting England in the 17th century because it was the English experience that central banking arises, and they solved some of the problems that other times where paper money arrived dealt with. Now, those familiar with English history may know that there was a significant political upheaval in England, which really changed the direction of government significantly, especially for us Americans. This century was a civil war as the throne passed back and forth between Catholic and Anglican rule. In 1638, Charles I needed money, and much of the gold was held in the Tower of London. The king simply seized the merchant's gold, amounting to a $200,000 loan. Now, the merchants, they did get their money back, but they were shaken by the experience, and it's probably likely that many of them opposed the king because it was a civil war. The merchants instead moved their gold to the goldsmiths for safekeeping. And once deposited, the depositor was given a gold certificate in exchange. Over time, many realized that they did not need to actually withdraw the gold to make an exchange, but could simply exchange the receipts knowing that they were gold substitutes. Let's see if we can get our slides to catch up here. All right. Now, this really becomes the next innovation in money. The gold certificates are more portable than gold coins. Similar in the way that gold was more portable than wheat, these certificates are more portable. Why? Gold is heavy, and paper just is not. Also, the paper does not make noise when transporting, again, reducing the chance of theft. Remember, the reason people are using the goldsmith to safekeep their gold is because of theft. So that is a big component on the way money evolves. However, if the gold that is deposited is not routinely withdrawn in exchange for that receipt, at least not all of it, then the goldsmiths may begin moving from demand deposit banking, where they're just keeping it for safekeeping, kind of warehousing it, to loan banking by loaning the gold at interest. Now, this is highly unstable since the certificate holder could at any time demand the deposit of gold and it's no longer in the safe. It's been lent out. Now, despite this instability, the goldsmiths realized that all the gold is not really ever withdrawn. They only need to keep a reserve to meet redemptions. So we're going to assume a 20% reserve required, or a required reserve. We still have them today, right? Mm-hmm. They could loan 80% of the gold, but this would reduce the gold in the vault, and they want to have gold in the vault. So alternatively, they could create 5 certificates for each gold unit that they possess. This would leave a 20% reserve in the bank, and they're able to make that reserve requirement then and really into a money multiplier. It's not keeping a certain amount of gold, it's allowing them to expand the money supply based on that certain amount of gold. And eventually they realized that their certificates do not even need to be created, and instead they could create a book entry as an account is redeemable in those certificates. This is really the next innovation in money and makes it much easier to transfer through check writing. Once again, now you don't even have to take the gold certificates out, where so you can just write the check, and so it's very difficult to steal at that point. And you don't have to make change. We know how difficult that is right now,
yes.
right? The change shortage. Nonetheless, the possibility of that eventual bank run is always present and really often realized. So let's jump to the next century, to a Scottish critique of the practice known as, you guys ready for this one? The Hume-Ricardo specie flow price mechanism.
Hume-Ricardo species price mechanism.
Flow, you forgot flow.
Flow, okay. I was
Person,
close.
man, woman, TV,
Okay.
camera. Okay, so that's a long name, but the concept is rather straightforward. Hume noticed that if a country expanded the money supply relative to gold coin, then the prices would rise in the expanding country since there's more money chasing the same amount of goods. The higher domestic prices would mean that you could buy things in other countries, so in this example, France, at a cheaper price. So the citizens of England would begin to import more merchandise from abroad. Now, since the goods in England are really more costly, the Frenchmen are not going to exchange their currency for the other merchandise in England. No, they're going to actually just request the gold. Remember, they're certificates. So as that, let's see where, as the previous, so let's go. Okay, so now they're pulling the gold over.
Right.
So now that the previous boom and inflationary cycle would have had a dramatic drop in circulation of money because they now have to take that money out, we would have a liquidity crisis and the bust would ensue. This is why we pay so much attention to money supply growth numbers here whenever we're looking at the market. While the money supply is expanding, you're going to see the money move into the market. And it's whenever that contraction happens that you'll start to see the pullback or the bust in the market. So
we've heard that word liquidity going back to 2008, 2009, and that was the concern going here with the market going down and people.
And why
pulling money
we've
from the
continued to
banks.
stay invested and climb that wall of worry because we've watched how much the money supply has grown. So let's sum this up in a rule, and there's probably a better way to phrase it, but I want to be a little bit more accurate. Gold flows toward banks that do not expand and away from banks that do expand the money supply. Now let's apply this rule to different banking models. The images may change a little, but each one is essentially the same concept. Over time, those goldsmiths become trusted and they become banks. Each bank would compete for deposits by paying interest on those deposits and earning money by loaning out the excess gold. At some point, one bank begins to expand the money supply to earn more interest and pay higher rates to capture more deposits. However, remember, the bank that expands most aggressively will eventually have their notes and checks fall in other banks, and the banks will request delivery of gold. The bank will need to aggressively contract the loans and notes by the same ratio it expanded. John, if you remember in 2008, how many of our clients that were business owners were having their loans called by the bank? This is what's happening. Mm-hmm. So since there are more notes and loans than there really is gold on hand, the bank will go bankrupt. The problem is the claims on the money end up in the other bank. That's what's causing the issue here. So then what is the solution? The solution would be have a single central bank that holds the gold. In 1913, the U.S. created the Federal Reserve, with each commercial bank being a branch of the Federal Reserve. There was one single Federal Reserve and that issued Federal Reserve banknotes. And all the gold was transferred to the Federal Reserve Bank. So the gold never leaves the expanding bank. It's all one bank. Or at least until a depositor requests the gold and not a certificate of gold. And this will happen. And there are more certificates than gold. We have a bank run. This happened frequently in the U.S. and continued until the creation of the Federal Deposit Insurance Program, FDIC in 1933. However, the FDIC would not be able to deliver gold or guarantee the redemption of certificates in gold because, once again, there are more gold certificates or claims against gold than there is actual gold. The solution was to make possession of gold illegal for individuals. Now, prior to enacting the FDIC on April 5th, 1933, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt forbade the hoarding of gold and certificates and demanded that they be given to the Federal Reserve. Now, after, you gotta love this one, after the gold was redeemed, the U.S. revalued gold from $20.67 per ounce to $35 per ounce. I know I would be frustrated if I got 20 and then later found out that the government decides it's worth 35. Now, this is a 70% increase in the price of gold. And what's happening is prior to this, the government had inflated the money by about 70%. So they were now making parity with the amount of certificates that were out there versus the amount of gold that they had on. So in essence, they devalued the paper money or contracted the money. Now remember our rule. Gold flows towards banks that do not expand and away from banks that do expand. And as we saw in the original example, even though we have a central bank here in the US, each country has its own central bank. So you will still have gold flow away from banks expanding the money supply relative to the other banks. But by devaluing the certificates, the U.S. actually had contracted that money supply relative to others. This means other banks, specifically the Bank of England here, and we can get into, hopefully, at some point why we had the roaring 1920s, and it has to do with this phenomena on the Bank of England. But they were expanding relative to the U.S., and gold just flew into the United States coffers. And by 1946, after the World War II, the U.S. had most of the world's gold. And we went on to a system called the Bretton Woods system, where the U.S. dollar became the reserve currency of the world, and any central bank could redeem $35 for an ounce of gold. Now, eventually the U.S. did inflate the money supply at a more rapid pace than other countries. And it accelerated with a guns and butter economic platform that was used, especially in the 60s all the way through the 70s. And it was with the passage of the Great Society, so butter, and the Vietnam War, guns. This increased spending, and eventually it drained the gold coffers as gold flowed out of the U.S. and to other countries. There were actually Air Force jets that were having to fly the metal daily to the London Exchange. And on August 15th, 1971, Nixon closed the gold window, and the entire globe, for the first time ever, went to a fiat standard, meaning there was no longer a commodity backing the currency, and with floating exchange rates. Prior to that, each currency was pegged to the other. What happened is you're able to expand the fiat currency infinitely and stop the inevitable contraction of the money supply. So no longer is it tied to gold, where you'll have some hiccup and you run out of gold and you have to contract the money supply. Don't have to do that anymore. You can print as much money as you want. There's nothing there but the faith of the government, right? But was this the only problem to solve? Was the bank run the only issue that we had? Is there a fundamental economic problem when we're expanding the money supply? And we've already gone over a lot this week, so we will begin to review this question next week. And I know we are covering some kind of dense topics here, and we'll continue to build them up, as well as try to summarize them each week. And the purpose of this is ultimately to explain our long-term investment thesis. Now, speaking of our thesis, there are no changes on our themes. However, we did make some trades last week. And I hope the last few weeks' material is demonstrating why we believe that inflation risk is high. And we have a couple more concepts really to review, and then we can start to really apply these concepts to our investment selection, our investment theme, to have a better understanding why we think these are the trends to follow. Now, we continue to climb that wall of worry, and though last 2 weeks we've seen a stall in the markets rise, we're still trading right in line with the general trend. There were no changes in our asset class tilts. Now, our concern regarding the dollar continues to grow. We are now moving into a downward trend. We're out of that trendy range. This is not the time to have high cash balances beyond your cash hub or to take any big bets on dollar-denominated bonds unless you have a view that the dollar is about ready to have a sharp rally. And that's always a possibility. But we're not the only people concerned about this. Other people are seeing it as well. And Goldman Sachs made headlines this week, probably with the most bearish take, where they have concerns that the dollar may lose its status as the world reserve currency based on debasement fears. I think those fears are justified. We're just not as pessimistic, at least yet. And if this was to happen, it would certainly create much higher inflation than what we are anticipating. We think it's somewhere around 5 to 10% over the next couple of years. Now, because of our concern for the dollar and views on inflation risks of bonds as well as cash, here's that trade. We added exposure to gold miners to qualified accounts last week, prior to the recent almost rocket ship rise of gold and silver. Large cap growth slowed last week when we're looking at the relative strength. Mids and smalls rallied, and this is also one of our other overweights. So it was nice to see one of the other things that were overweight rise, while one thing that were overweight was starting to lose some momentum. In addition, gold is reasserting itself and has made new all-time highs, as many of our listeners are probably very aware. I will turn it over to you for questions and answers.
Well, you were speaking about gold and silver, and the questions have been coming in around that because prices of both have spiked last week and this week. In fact, today, another spike. But gold has now topped its 2011 record high.
Yes.
What about real estate?
Real estate is it was always location, right? So what kind of real estate? We're looking at home purchases and up 4.5% year over year while we've gone through a recession. It's been very resilient. Having a home is probably a good hedge against inflation for your net worth, but it's really hard to spend. But if you were to get into commercial real estate, we know there's a bear and bull argument to be made. But that bear argument has been a pretty good one. The work from home, the recession, retail really getting hit by Amazon. So you got to be very careful on what real estate you're buying, as well as most of these states get a lot of their revenue from property values and as well as sales tax. If sales tax is lower because people are not going to the brick and mortar stores in the way that they used to, where's the state going to turn to increase or make up that spread? Probably property values. So there's a lot of things to consider, but everything equal, I think real estate is a good option. It's certainly better than bonds. Bonds only at this point should be used as a ballast in your portfolio, just to try to tamper some of that volatility.
So switching to another topic, polls are now showing Biden leading Trump for the presidential election. Some of our listeners have commented that a Biden election may mean higher taxes and a move back to globalization, making business in the U.S. not as favorable as it is today. Can you explain our view on what a Biden election may mean for the economy and the market?
I think it's going to be very interesting to see who he selects for his vice president. That'll tell us whether he is going to move towards those that are more on the extremes for the left, or is it going to be more of a centrist? And I think that'll give us a good indication on what his policies would be, whether we're going to favor renewable energies, whether we're going to have much higher taxes. I think he's been very clear that he wants to have higher taxes. Regarding the competitiveness, yeah, he would probably reach out to other nations and try to make some be less rigid than President Trump. But that populist movement that is happening, not just here in the U.S., but also just globally, whether it's in Europe or elsewhere, is already affecting a Democrat policy as well. So they're going to address, and they'll probably expand beyond just trade restrictions with China. They would probably look at putting other restrictions on technology and intellectual property rights as well. So I think we could see higher taxes, especially on the corporate level. But I don't think it's going to be a move to globalism, because it seems Democrat or Republican. And that's one of the reasons President Trump was able to win last time whenever the polls were against him, right? Is he was able to hit that group of people that really want to bring stuff back to the U.S. So both of those parties are having to fight for that. And I think Biden's going to have to hit that center and really focus on that national economy versus what they would have campaigned, let's say, in 2008.
So, with the U.S. debt at historical highs and accelerating, as we've talked about in the prior weeks, how will taxes be affected in the future? So let me just give you some perspective. As of today, 70% of all income taxes collected are paid by the top 10% of wage earners, where only 3.1% of income taxes are paid by the bottom 50%. In fact, the average income tax effective rate for wage earners for the bottom 50% is only 4%. Now, so what that tells our tax system already favors lower wage earners. So where will future tax increases come from?
Well, part of it is the Pareto distribution, right? It doesn't matter how we design the tax code. 80% of the revenue is probably always going to come from about 20% of the taxpayer base. And you can play with these numbers, and you can do it with, oftentimes we hear that 50% of the wealth is held by 1%. Well, if you take that 80-20 rule, you find out that 50% of the wealth actually should be held by 1% whenever you do the 80-20 rule. And I think that's the same with taxation. It doesn't matter what system you have, there's going to be 20% of the people that are going to carry 80% of the load. The business, it seems it's a law. Now, what was another question?
So where will the future tax increases come from?
Right, so where are the future? Well, we believe that inflation is a tax, and that's probably the most politically viable way, because most people don't understand it as a tax. So we just printed $3 trillion, and we made purchases, and some of it may have been transferred to individuals through government. But how were they able to make purchase? Basically, they were able to tax purchasing power from other people and transfer that to themselves or favored people within the legislative chain. That is a tax, and it's a favor tax, because there are a lot of people that will not like to see their tax bill, and the only way we could increase, and the only way we could, we can't pay for this through tax increases. It would kill the economy. So we think it's going to be more subtle, that it'll be trying to push corporate taxes back up as a politically viable. There are a lot less voters that own companies to bring power against the politicians. So look for different avenues of taxation than just kind of a direct income tax, because that hits more people, so you're going to have a lot more pushback to that. Plus, right now, you can just print money and get away with it, right? So why raise taxes if you can just do this modern monetary theory and print the money up and spend it anyways?
Well, while we talk about the bottom 50% of taxpayers paying only 3.1% of the income taxes, there is a tax that really impacts them significantly, and that's FICA and Medicare tax, all those Social Security taxes. I mean, this total that the employee pays is 7.65% of every dollar, all the way up to $137,700. That's a pretty high tax.
Right.
And then the employer pays a matching 7.65%. Now,
Semantics,
it's not
right?
It's a semantics, because at the end of the day, that's money that they could be paying to the employee. So it's really a 15.3% tax.
It is, and a regressive tax. Because
so it's hitting the smallest people.
right, unlike the other where there's a progressive tax. This is a regressive tax. The more money you make, the less effective rate you're going to pay in that. And there's all kinds of arguments that can be made on that, on whether that's right or not. But it certainly is. If you were to tell somebody in the bottom 50% that they don't have high taxes, they're looking at their paycheck and they're seeing a good chunk come out.
Exactly. That's my point.
So they are, and you can call it anything you want. It's still a tax.
Absolutely.
It decreases their income.
So how do we see this changing in the future because of the fact that we do have this large debt, and what impact would that change have on the economy?
Well, one of the reasons that we've watched our deficit in debt jump, yes, it's been problems with 2008 as well as here recently in 2020 with deficit spending on stimulus. But another thing that's happened is that Social Security benefits now pay out more than what is collected in Social Security tax. And that money that used to be in that lockbox, if we all remember the Al Gore campaign, that was just used in Treasury. So if a company did this, this would be accounting fraud. All of that debt is now rolling onto the national debt. It's no longer held as a Social Security debt, and it's showing up. So we are in a situation where we pay a lot more, and it's only growing. So that's why they're extending out Social Security benefits and moving the age further. That's why they're changing the methodology on how they do inflation and adjust those costs of living so that it continues to push the number down through odd things like hedonics. It's a legitimate economic thought, but it always seems to favor the government's payout. So there's definitely some changes that are going to have to be made at some point. And John, we've talked about this. I don't have any slides here. But when you start to look at how much discretionary income after all the mandatory spending that the government has to take care of, that discretionary is really, really decreasing to the point that if we just have a small uptick in the interest rate, all of a sudden we'll have no discretionary. Social Security benefits and other things are mandated spending. You also have military spending, and at some point it's geezers and guns. Yes, the people that are older that are on Social Security benefit, they do vote. But think about all the military tensions that we are having right now. So those are two things that are really going to kind of butt heads, and it's going to be really, really difficult to raise taxes in a way to be able to meet both of those. So there is some type of reckoning. I don't know what the outcome is that is building up that will have to be dealt with at some point.
Yeah, I think so. One of the things that we do just from a planning perspective with clients is that rather than assume that Social Security is not going to be there, we assume that it's probably not going to be there at the same level.
Right.
There's going to be some erosion of the real value of that, the purchasing power of that. Right. So when we plan with clients, we're typically putting in an inflation rate of that's lower than what the expected inflation is going to be.
And it makes sense because the further you get out, where a lot of the risk really is, the lower you're dependent upon Social Security within your plan. And if anyone is in that situation where they're highly dependent upon Social Security, I would say that there is concern for that person.
Yes. Well, we do have other questions, but we've also run out of time, and so we'll save these for next week. Some of these are very, very good. But I do want to remind our listeners that the discussions around any specific stock or mutual fund is not an endorsement to buy or sell, but simply commentary based upon each commentator's opinion. And all investments have risk. Past performance is not indicative of future results. I wish I could get this out faster so I could get past that, but it's something that we have to say each time. But these weekly broadcasts, these broadcasts are open to the public, so feel free to share the link to our broadcasts on social media or with your friends and family, as they are more than welcome to listen in and learn our perspective on the market and the economy. Thanks again for listening in to today's broadcast. As always, if you have any questions, please contact your lead advisor or any member of our team. We are here for you.